This is Talking Drupal, a weekly chat about web design and development from a group of people with one thing in common. We love Drupal. This is episode 475, Workspaces. On today's show, we are talking about Workspaces, what they are, and how they work with our guest, Scott Weston. We'll also cover Workspaces Extra as our module of the week. Welcome to Talking Drupal. Our guest today is Scott Weston. Scott is Senior Director of the Drupal practice at Bounteous Acolyte. He has been working with Drupal since the early days of Drupal 6 and holds more Aqua certifications than anyone else globally. He is co-maintainer of documentation for database and queries on Drupal.org and is a regular presenter at DrupalCons and camps. Scott is passionate about making the administration and management of Drupal websites easy for site managers and content creators. Welcome to the show, and thank you for joining us.
All right, thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
I'm Nick Laughlin, founder at Enlightened Development, and today my co-hosts are, for his second show, Joshua Mitchell, founder, principal consultant at M6L. Welcome back.
Hey, everybody.
And as usual, John Picozzi, solution architect at EPAM.
Hey, friends.
And now to talk about our module of the week, let's turn it over to Martin Anderson-Klutz, a senior solutions engineer at Acquia and a maintainer of a number of Drupal modules and recipes of his own. Martin, what do you have for us this week?
Thanks, Nick. Do you want to extend the capabilities of the Workspaces system in Drupal core? There's a module for that. It's called Workspaces Extra, and it was created in April of 2021 by Andre Matescu, A. Matescu on Drupal.org of Tag 1, who has also contributed to Workspaces in core, among many other things. Now, it does have a 2.0.0 Alpha 3 release, which works with Drupal 10.3 or 11. It is actively maintained. In fact, that latest release is less than a week old. For security, technically it's opted into security coverage, but it won't actually have coverage until there's a stable release. There is test coverage, and it has 20 open issues, 3 of which are bugs against the current branch, though one of those has already been fixed. According to Drupal.org, it's currently in use by 89 sites. And one of the big features that was in the Drupal 10.3 release was that Workspaces is now officially stable. That said, not everything works the way some site builders will want it to. And that's where a contrib solution like Workspace Extra can help to fill in the gaps. It provides new options like letting you roll back changes from a published workspace, move content between workspaces, discard changes in a workspace, squashing content revisions when a workspace is published, and more. Workspaces Extra, or WSE, also includes a number of submodules to add even more capabilities. For example, they can allow your workspace to stage an allow list of configuration changes, deploy workspace content using an import-export system, stage menu changes, and more. For workflow, there's an option to generate a shareable workspace preview link for external users, and a scheduler to publish your workspace at a specific day and time. I will add that the first time I played with Workspaces, I ran into an issue where I couldn't create media entities within a workspace. I don't know for sure that this has been fixed in core, but the core issue about it is still listed as needs work. That said, the last comment on that issue, and we'll have a link in the show notes, lists WSE as something that helps. So if you encounter the same issue with Workspaces, WSE is worth a try. So let's talk about Workspaces Extra.
The value of this show just got exponentially better with the addition of this module. I feel like this does a lot of things, just looking at the list here, that I'm like, oh, that's cool. Oh, that's cool. Hey, look at that. That's cool. Yeah, I think this is probably a great add-on for Workspaces.
I can also mention that I first heard about this module myself during the recording of an episode a few months back when we had Ron Northcutt as I think he was a guest host at the time. Might have been an off-the-cuff episode.
Yeah, I'll have to keep this in mind. I have to say, we'll probably talk about this more, but Workspaces feels like a game changer for people that maintain seasonal content, right? And yeah, I don't have a lot of clients that need that, but the clients that do need that, the amount of workarounds that we create to try to make it so that they can publish like even just like 5 or 6 pages during like, or not even seasonal, like if they're putting out a coupon or, having a fall sale or something, like I think this is going to, um, I think this is going to enhance something that a lot of clients are going to
Yeah.
really like about Drupal.
Yeah, I tend to agree, and I will say, and we're gonna once we get into the show, we'll talk more about this. But I think like the first time I used Workspaces, it was a little hinky, and it was before it was like included in Core fully. So, but like I do agree, Nick. I think like the content shell game shifting, whatever you want to call it, for different Drupal environments is going to be super interesting, and that's something that Workspaces Extra seems to have some pretty interesting tools to help with that, specifically like moving content between workspaces and the client I'm thinking I was using Layout Builder, so like the Layout Builder tweaks for workspaces are, I think, are going to be pretty interesting. So yeah, interested to kind of add this in and see how it works. And Martin, have you used this module like in detail, or like once or twice, or not at all? Like what's your feel there?
If I recall correctly, I've installed it and played around with it, but I think that was just after 10.3 was released. And so I think a lot of the extra goodness and changes that have been put into the module to really make it, better suited as an enhancement for 10.3 and newer specifically, because some of the things that the module had before then actually got sort of released as part of that 10.3 release when Workspaces became stable. And so I think if you look back at it, like the 1.0 release was really pre 10.3 for a lot of things that eventually were released as part of 10.3. And now the 2.0 branch is really for things that build on top of 10.3 and newer. So I haven't really had a chance to use the 2.0 branch, but definitely something I'm excited to try out.
I'm actually sorry. I'm as you're speaking, I'm also looking at the submodules provided, and like the last two, Workspaces Preview and Workspaces Scheduler. I'm like, holy moly, those feel like great additional use cases there. So
Yeah, the scheduler module I think is really going to be a game changer for content managers,
yeah,
because like Nick said, if you have like a promotion or a coupon that's going live, do you want to have someone awake at 2 a.m. Eastern time to like launch that? And with a scheduler, once you've used it a few times, you have confidence that when cron runs after that appointed time, it's going to publish everything, and you have that confidence. You can sleep easy and know that your site, the content's going to get updated.
or at least wake up like 5 or 10 minutes after the content's supposed to be published, look at it and go, okay, I'm going back to sleep now.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Pull it
Looks
up on
good.
your phone, right? And you
Yeah,
don't have to
yeah,
get on
right.
your
You don't even have to leave. You don't have to. I mean, that's what everybody's moving towards, is like not having to leave their bed to do things on the internet.
I just have one thing to pick on about this module, and it occasionally happens with contrib modules that are a part of an ecosystem. But why WSE? Why not workspaces underscore extra? Like, I think every module that extends other modules should be underscore, after the module name. We have this with the group module, where group media is all crammed together and not two separate. But I would love to see some standard conventions for those.
Yeah, it's 7 extra characters that you'd have to type every time you're typing a hook or something like that. So that may be why they shortened it.
The one that
Go ahead, Martin.
I was just going to say, the one I came across recently that I found really puzzling was within the group module. One of the submodules is group node, but it's G node is the machine name.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I was like,
yeah.
Well, I think historically, the reason for that, I bet if we talk to Christian, is that I bet you that was the original module or something, the original genesis of group. And that's probably where it came from, if I had to guess.
My guess would be it started off as a separate project and they just decided to bring it in as a submodule. But yeah, there's a variety of ways that could have come to pass.
Do you know how much easier it would have been, though, if I were searching for Gnode instead of group? Because the namespace group is so horrible to search against. Drupal group, and sometimes you get organic groups results and all that kind of stuff. I mean, I love the module. I use it for lots of projects, but I found out that Velcro, you mentioned Velcro last week's episode, that namespace is available. So one of us needs to build a module named Velcro.
Well,
Just
now, all of our listeners are now going to go get that namespace. So By the time this
Well,
comes out, it'll be gone.
Patreon, our Patreon supporters get first dibs. So
Interesting.
I also I also just want to point out too, I think you just said, was it you, Scott, or Josh that said that it's extra characters you have to type out when creating a hook? That's no longer the case with object-oriented hooks with the hook attribute. You just need to type out the actual hook that you're implementing. So that should no longer be a consideration.
So what I was going to say is that, naming things is hard, but I think like when you're in that development mindset, like what Scott said probably holds true. They're like, oh, shorter is better, so let's make it an acronym. But sometimes we don't think about the end users and the fact that somebody that doesn't understand why something has an acronym or why it's shorter is better might be like, oh, I need to look at for modules in the workspace ecosystem. And they may or may not find this. I'm assuming they probably will, because they'll probably type workspaces into Google. But yeah, naming conventions.
All right. So thank you, Martin, so much. If our listeners want to get in touch or have a module leak to suggest to themselves, what's the best way for them to do that?
it's always great to get nominations for Module of the Week in the Talking Drupal channel of Drupal Slack, or folks can reach out to me directly as ManClue on all of the Drupal and social platforms.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Martin. See you next week.
All right. See you next week.
All right. Nominations for the 2025 Aaron Winborn Award are now open. You can recognize somebody who embodies service, integrity, and kindness in our community. There will be a link in the show notes to make your own nominations.
Hey, listeners, New England Drupal Camp is happening in Providence, Rhode Island on November 15th and 16th. 2 full days of Drupal right there in the middle of Rhode Island. The 15th is going to feature a full day higher ed summit with a keynote, lightning talks, group table discussions. We also have full and half day trainings being offered on the 15th, and a contrib day where Drupal CMS track leads like Martin will be working on Drupal CMS issues and working to build the next great version of Drupal. That 15th will be capped off with a community social. We'll grab some food, some drinks, have some more Drupal-y conversations, play some pool. It will be a great time and gear us right up for the 16th, which is a full day of sessions. This year, New England Drupal Camp is actually partnering with our friends from Boston for Design for Drupal and offering a full day design-focused track. So we hope if you are a designer in the Drupal community and you're looking for an event, you'll come to New England Drupal Camp and take advantage of that. We also have a keynote on the 16th from Karen McGran and Jeff Eaton. You may or may not remember Jeff from Drupal Trivia at DrupalCons. And that is gonna, I'm sure, be very entertaining and informative. Again, the 16th is capped off with we like to party in the Drupal community, so we're doing an after party. It's going to be 2 days full of Drupal, full of fun. We hope to see you in Providence, Rhode Island, again, November 15th and 16th. You can find out more at nedcamp.org.
All right, we can go on to our primary topic now. So let's start with maybe a high-level question, Scott. What are workspaces in Drupal?
Yeah. So Workspaces, it's a module that allows you to create, I say, contained spaces. And within these spaces, you can create and edit content and store them in this contained space until you're ready to publish that content. So it allows you to make changes. You can make multiple edits to content in that same space. Allows you to view and with the Workspaces Extras module, like we were just talking about, it allows you to send a preview link to somebody so that they can view that content sort of in situ, provide any feedback, make any additional updates, anything like that. And then when all of that content is ready to be published, you can publish it simultaneously. With the workspaces, each of those contained spaces is called a workspace. when you first turn on the module, you have two workspaces that come along with installation. One is live, and that is the live site, so it's really not a space, so to speak. And then it creates one called stage, and you can create multiple workspaces. So you can have maybe different content efforts going on at any one time. And you can even create sub workspaces. So if you want to divide up a larger effort with that. Um, so yeah, it works with any content entity that is created or edited. So we're talking nodes, taxonomy terms, custom menu links, um, and also media. But there is some wonkiness along with media, it sounds like, from our earlier discussion. It does work with Layout Builder. So really any kind of content that you want to create, whether it's a Layout Builder page, just a standard node page with a template, all of those can fall under a workspace.
So just want to add a point of clarification there. You're saying that it works with content, so it does not impact configuration. So if you were to change, I don't know, account sign up value or a meta tag configuration, that would still apply to all of the workspaces unilaterally?
Yeah. So any configuration changes that you make have to be made in the live workspace. Uh, if you are in a stage workspace or another workspace that you've created, you can view that configuration form. So like adding a node type or making a change to a content type or a taxonomy vocabulary. But when you go to hit save, you get a nice little warning that says you must be in the live workspace to make that change. Uh, a great feature, I think, would be to give you that warning preemptively that if you hit save, you're not going to be able to save it. So it may change or it may save some frustration for someone who maybe goes in and creates a view or tries to edit a view.
Yeah.
And then when they hit save, that's when they see that they say that those changes can't be saved.
Yeah.
Yeah, it reminds me of there used to be a module. Well, used to be. I'm sure that still exists, but for configuration, where you could lock configuration, and it would say like right at the top when you went to a config page, it would say right at the top like, "Hey, this configuration can't be edited. Go talk to your site administrator." Sounds like something similar. Okay,
Yeah.
so that. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to add with the Workspaces Extras module, there is a config submodule that allows you to make configuration changes within a staging workspace. However, those apply global. Those changes apply globally. They're not
Yeah.
contained to that workspace. So, example would be if you had this extras module enabled and you added a field to a content type. I'm sure there's a totally different discussion around adding fields to content types in production. But if you were to do that, it will make that change, but it is not, again, contained within that workspace.
It seems like you want to pair that with config ignore or something like that, so that if it was the type of thing that you would allow that change for,
Yeah, exactly. Something like
Yeah.
maybe a web form.
or redirect 404, because that generates config changes every time, but you usually want to have an editor or admin do that in production. So
Yeah, exactly.
I feel like that module is helpful in the fact that if you understand how workspaces work, that like you won't be hindered by the fact that you have to switch back to the live workspace in order to make that change every time. But I think that's probably a higher level of understanding.
Well, I think it's more about the user experience, though. If you're, and it's not just about production too, because you can have workspaces on lower environments as well. I can easily see you getting confused, being on a staging thing and being like, "Hey, a staging workspace," and having to change something. I think really the right thing to do is to just say, "Hey, this change is going to apply everywhere globally," like the Workspaces Extra says, and just give that warning rather than not applying it. But you definitely need to notify them that it's going live immediately because it's config. Um, I think there's also one kind of related thing that I noticed about workspaces, and I've only been evaluating it, so correct me if I misspeak. But the other thing is when you create a workspace, when you edit content, you can only ever edit content in one workspace. one sub
Right.
workspace. You can't have 4 different versions of the homepage, for example. You can only
Mhm.
have the live version and some workspace that has an edited version. Conversely, if you create new content on a workspace, on a sub workspace, I'll call it, I don't know if there's a better term, it will create the same workspace on the live site. I mean, the same content on the live site, but just leave it unpublished. And I suspect that's to make sure that you don't have node ID conflicts when you do publish, because you need to know what ID a page is going to be,
Mhm.
especially if it's being used by views or things. So if you're creating content, test content, you are going to be incrementing the node ID, which
Yeah.
and having that unpublished content on production. Now, what I don't know what happens if you create content on a sub workspace and then publish that on production. Does that just like publish it through the workspace too? Or does it
So
remain overridden?
yeah, the workspace lives in the environment on which it was created. It they don't move across environments when like doing a config export. So a workspace that is created again just stays in that
Okay.
environment. So if you created uh, a workspace in production called Holiday 2024 promo, where you're going to put in your coupons and promotional content. That's just where that lives. And if you were
Yeah.
to do a content export, that workspace would not be created as part of that, an import into another environment.
So
Okay.
that brings up an interesting topic, right? So my head is going like a million miles an hour right now with different use cases for workspaces, but which is very alliterative work use cases for workspaces. Anyway, um, I'm wondering what common use cases you're seeing for workspaces right now, and what's it good at, what's it maybe not so good at.
Mhm. Yeah. So there really are like four kind of use cases that I've seen so far. First is if there is a large amount of content that needs to be created or edited, and all of these go with the background of you want it all published at the same time.
Mhm.
So again, like a set of promotional content that may be uh, something for the homepage that links to a promo landing page that has some other media in there. So something like that where you have a lot of content you want to publish all at once. Typically, that could be something for a specific effort, or if you are revamping a section of a website, could be another example. If you want to stage up maybe changes to your privacy policy that you know are going to go live on December 1st, you may want to go ahead and get those locked in and then have it publish those at a scheduled time. Sometimes, if there is a longer lead time for go live, so if it needs to be reviewed by, uh, you know, compliance, legal, marketing, some other groups, but then also outside of the typical workflow, which we'll talk about workflow and workspaces, I'm sure at some point. Outside your typical workflow, you need to get someone else's eyes on it. That's where that Workspaces Extra preview link would be great to give them insight into what those changes are and give them a chance to provide feedback. Also, if you need to review content as a group, and you could take that group as either view the content as a whole of all the changes, but also if you have a group of people that need to review, and you don't all want to sit around one laptop or have a very structured workflow for those review and approvals, you could use Workspaces for that.
Okay.
Where it would not be good in my mind is if you need to make a quick edit to like a single page. So let's say someone spells your name wrong on a blog post and you just need to make that change. Using a workspace for that probably isn't a good use case. That would just be additional steps that you may not need to do.
Hmm.
That makes sense. I think that's again, my head's going a million miles an hour because I have like a very practical use case for this like today that I want to maybe play with after the show, but um that all makes a lot of sense, and I think I don't know that we're actually gonna cover workspaces and workflows. Oh, wait, yes, I do see a question there. So never mind. I'll wait to ask that later. But yeah,
We got
okay.
one later on the list.
There you go.
Yeah. So Workspaces went stable in core on what version?
10.4 and 11. I think it was still experimental in the 10 branch, but 11.0 it's out of experimental.
Nice.
Oh, nice.
Would you say it feels really stable too? I mean, like I
Yeah, it does. There are a few limitations right now and some gotchas. So we have the concept of workspace and sub workspaces. So if you do create sub workspaces and you make your changes in there, you basically merge them up into that main workspace, like a staging workspace, and then you publish that. So they kind of roll up. So you can't just go from a sub workspace to published. You have to merge it into the main workspace, and then it's published. Right now, there's an issue where there's some cruft left in the database when you do that sub workspace to the main workspace merging or publication merging in, and it leaves the identifier of that sub workspace in the database. So then if you were to create another sub workspace with that same name, that content is just like magically in there. There is a patch for it. I think it's currently being reviewed, but that should resolve that
Okay.
issue.
Feels like that could be a feature,
Yeah.
not a bug. Who knows?
Could be, could be. And that kind of gets into, sorry for a little bit of a tangent here, gets into like how this is set up in the database.
Hmm.
So when you enable the Workspaces module, it adds a field to the base table of those content entity or those entity types that is just Workspace ID. So that gets inserted into the value of the workspace that that content is in gets inserted into that database, that row in the database table. So that's how Drupal knows if that piece of content is currently being edited or waiting for publication within a different workspace. So that's how, again, Drupal knows what workspace a piece of content is in. So when you go to edit, let's say inadvertently you want to edit a piece of content that's already in a workspace, in a different workspace, that's where it knows, and it tells you, hey, this is being edited in this other workspace. And I believe it provides a link directly to that workspace. So that little bit of under the hood, but also kind of explaining why at the current time you can't edit content within multiple
It,
workspaces.
I have two kind of technical follow up, or one technical follow up and one potentially interesting use case. So if you're storing that identifier on the base table to know which workspace something is part of, how is Drupal how does Drupal know which workspace you're currently viewing? Is that like a state? Is it
Yeah,
something else?
it's I believe it's just in the state in the key value table what the
Okay.
active workspace is. And if you're, I'm not sure if the gen theme allows for this, but if you're just using the default admin theme, there's a little bar at the top of the screen that tells you what workspace you're currently in. You click on that, and then you can pick a different workspace to navigate to.
Okay.
Yeah. So you just said something about not being able to edit content in two different workspaces. So
Mhm.
do you mean like you can't edit content at the same time in two different workspaces, or like, because I mean, I assume like Workspaces Extra allows you to kind of like clone and move content from one workspace to another. So like
Mhm.
if you were doing content versioning, right? Like, hey, I have the live content, I have version 1, version 2, version 3, like you could be working in all of those versions,
Mhm.
or different users, I guess I should say, could be working in all of those different versions at the same time, and like things would be okay, right?
So when you make an edit to, let's just take privacy policy page as an example.
Yeah.
If you are in a staging workspace and you make an edit to it, it creates a new revision, and in that revision, it has the workspace ID.
Mm-hmm.
So it knows which one is published, which one to show to public, which one to show when you're in that workspace. Um, and if you were to say use the Workspaces extra module to move that edited content from one workspace to another, It just changes the ID in the database on that same row.
Mhm.
I do not believe that there's a way currently where you can have multiple the same piece of content, so the same node ID in multiple workspaces simultaneously and doing edits in each of those. It's kind of an all or nothing
Yeah.
thing. And even if you have that privacy policy page in the staging workspace, you made an edit to it, and then you switch back to the live uh, workspace, and you go to make an edit, it will tell you can't make an edit because it is in a workspace. So you can't even make like a quick edit to a page that is within another workspace.
Huh.
Well, that
So
feels like a gotcha.
eh,
Like, because you could end up with content you can't edit that you're preparing to stage to swap
Well,
out.
no,
And
unless it's in
something to
prod,
consider.
you can edit the production workspace. You just can't edit the same content in a third workspace.
Right. So yeah, once that page is within a workspace
so
pending publication, you can't edit it from the live site.
so let's go back to the example of like, okay, I have, we'll use the privacy page because that's the one that you went with, right?
Mhm.
So we have the privacy page on our production environment, our live workspace, right? We create version 1, or version 2 workspace, right? And we edit the privacy policy there a little bit. And then from version 2 we create version 3, and then we want to edit the privacy policy a
No,
little bit more in there.
you can't do
Not
that.
allowed?
Not allowed.
No,
You
cannot
can
do
make
that.
multiple edits to that within the version 2 workspace. But if you create a version 3 workspace, as an example, uh, you would have to wait till that version 2 is published before you can make changes to
Yeah.
that same piece of content in version 3.
No
Is
matter
this
how
similar
deep they
to-
are, you can only have production in one workspace per piece of content that's being edited.
This feels really similar to the issue with revisions, where if you've got a published default revision and you've got people going back and forth with, they've got some drafts, maybe they put something into review, but then they're like, oh, but I really need to edit the published version before we actually publish all these other changes. They basically have to revert that published version to create a revision in front of everything so then they can edit it again. Is there a
Yeah.
way to do that same sort of thing with workspaces where you can say, I just need to free this up so I can make this edit?
Not currently that I'm aware of.
Okay, interesting.
I
Well,
would wonder how they would reconcile if you made a change to the body copy of a page on the live workspace, but you had something else pending in the um, in the staged workspace. Maybe it would just be to override, but then you'd have to manually edit in multiple places to make sure you're capturing that one change that you wanted to make.
I thought you could edit upstream though, and it would just override it. But maybe I misunderstood in my testing.
Yeah, not in my testing, but I couldn't.
No,
I
it's
couldn't do-
Seems
I am more likely to be wrong in this case, so I will take it. Now my other question though is, whenever you have multiple versions of content, I have a client that hasn't asked yet, but I'm sure they will soon. Is there a way we could use this for A/B testing, where we have version A that's live and version B that we're testing, and we just use state to kind of flip them back and forth and some sort of reporting mechanism so that we can see how people interact with a particular page's content?
I I think that would probably be welcoming a lot of pain and hacking to be able to do that, if I'm honest, because Workspaces does have permissions to view a workspace, to own a workspace, and the like. And I think they're all predicated on being an authenticated user at a minimum. So I think you would be, yeah, again, hacking things to get like a
Well,
public view of a
are they
staging.
using the access policy API? Because if they are, I think it probably actually be pretty easy to get
it
around
feel
that.
it honestly feels like you're forcing it, right? Because I feel like there are far better tools to do A/B testing that don't really necessarily require
Yeah,
creating
far better
additional.
tools, that cost $100,000 a year.
Oh, I don't know about that. I don't know. I think you could probably find cheaper tools
Yeah,
out there
probably.
that
But
you could use. instead of like the forcing for Workspaces to do something that it might not be made for.
Okay, so getting back to the show notes, my actual next question is, and is I think we kind of skirted around this a little bit, but haven't directly addressed it. Do workspaces help with content versioning or like revisioning at all, or are they kind of outside that? When you publish a workspace, it's just the next revision in line.
Yeah, the latter, what you said, Nick. It's kind of something that's bolted on to content revisions. It just puts the revisions in a bucket, a workspace bucket, that it just batches them together to publish all at once.
So it feels to me, maybe I'm misunderstanding, or maybe I'm just not really getting it, but it feels like a little bit of a miss to me to say like, hey, Workspaces only really works with like net new content or like a single version of a piece of content, right? And not being able to kind of like stage those content changes. I mean, I guess if you wanted to stage them in certain sections, you could maybe structure your changes that way so that you could kind of have that content versioning. But um, the idea that like, hey, you can have your published content, you can have one kind of workspace version of that content, but then you couldn't like have another version of that content after the fact is like, I don't know. I'm having a hard time wrapping my head around that. So is there a plan to like work in that manner in the future, or is it just more of a difficulty with reconciling like, hey, you have 5 different versions of this page. Like how do we squish them all together, right?
Yeah, I think I'm certainly not qualified to say what the future looks like for workspaces.
Sure.
But I think the ability to make changes and track changes to specific fields in different workspaces to the same piece of content
Yeah.
would probably be the next step. So, in one workspace, you might edit the title of a node, but in a different workspace, you could edit the body content
Right.
of a node. That could be maybe a next step. I think the reconciling of multiple versions on the same field could get pretty hairy
Yeah.
to navigate, particularly since this tool is geared towards marketers, non-technical people to be able to
Right.
stage changes. You wouldn't be able to give them a diff, a
Yeah,
line by line diff of content and say, what do you want to keep without a lot of extra work.
yeah, and
You don't want to ask a CMO to resolve a merge conflict?
Well,
I
I mean,
mean, come on. They can use Git, right?
Right.
I also think, John, that while theoretically that sounds clean, I think it causes more. It's not as common a use case. I think really like they can't. I have a client already that I know is going to want this once we get to 11 because they have a couple of big campaigns a year, and right now we do a whole lot of juggling to like create the content upstream and keep it unpublished and then publish it in lower environments. But now we can output, and they have like staged releases for different like as the campaign goes on. And so they can easily like publish the first stage and then modify those pages in the child workspace for when the child workspace goes live too. So there's already a lot of built-in flexibility. I think the one thing that might be doable that's not quite what you're asking for, but still would be a pretty significant technical hurdle is I can see people wanting to have more than one immediate child version. So, like, they wanna change the homepage, they know they wanna change it, but they don't know if they wanna change it to A or B. And so having version A and version B, both that are children, immediate children, and have it and just have the restrictions where, like, when you're publish if you publish version A, say it's going to delete version B. It will be
Well,
gone.
yeah, I mean, for me, it's more like, hey, let's put the onus on the content editor creator, right? To say like, hey, you have your published version, you have version one,
Yeah.
right? You created version two, if you want to edit the page, just note that you have there, maybe maybe Workspaces extras could have like a clone feature, or it does have a clone feature, but like instead of moving it from workspace to workspace, maybe it could just clone it from workspace to workspace, where you say, hey, I cloned this from version 1 to version 2. I edited in version 2. Version 2 is going to overwrite version 1 when this stuff goes live, right? And to be fair, Nick, like I think there is there is a need for that, because I actually have a use case for this right now, where I have a client that is looking to basically stage rapid multiple versions of some new content, but possibly edits to the same content, right? One right after the other. So like, I think there is a use case there. Maybe it's not as widely spread as I think it is, but it was just curious. I think Workspaces is
Yeah.
a great tool, and it, if you know the rules, right, it can be very useful and solve maybe 75% of that problem.
It's a pretty big technical hurdle. I mean, that's the reason why it is the way it is.
Yeah, like
And
I mean, as Josh alluded to, right? Like not everybody is very familiar with kind of like merge strategies, and like how to correctly like merge two things together to make them
yep.
one. And I would not want to wish that on any CMO or content editor. So as we kind of illustrated with our module of the week, right? Workspaces extras is in the Workspaces ecosystem, module ecosystem. I'm wondering if there are any other notable Workspaces modules that you've come in contact with, Scott, or that you can recommend.
I haven't really come across any. It seems like every time there's been a question of like, hey, could we do this with Workspaces? Workspaces extras has thought of it already. I would imagine that there could be some additional modules that come on as Drupal 11 adoption grows and people adopt the Workspaces concept.
So it's a growing ecosystem, it sounds like.
Yeah, for sure. I think one of the challenges for Workspaces is going to be for a lot of organizations, it's going to be a shift, hopefully for the better, in how they manage and stage content changes. If we've worked with clients before, we've probably had the question asked, in Drupal 8 or Drupal 9 or early days of 10 of, hey, I want to do a promotion on such and such date where I have like these 10 pages that need to go live, or I need to make these edits. How do I do that? And, a lot of times it's just, either workflow with a publication scheduler, or it's you gotta get up at midnight and publish all these things, or add the new content or edit the content. So I think this is a bit of a shift, and I think it's going to be a good shift to where we're going to maybe get fewer questions to say, hey, can I just stage all my content on the staging server and then we just magically push it to production? Great in theory, horrible implementation, a lot of pain and stress to try to get that to work right when they're also wanting to use the staging environment for like a UAT or something like that for new functions. So this, I think, will help overall, content management for non-technical folks.
Before we move on, actually, this makes me wonder, what does this landscape look like outside of Drupal? Like, are there a lot, like, there's certainly a lot of tools like Google Docs where you can have multiple people editing the same thing at once, right? But do other CMSs that you're aware of have tools that look like this where you can kind of just stage content and release it? Did you guys look at other CMSs when building this? Because I mean, I don't use a whole lot of other CMSs, but I'm not aware, other than like revisions, right? Which a lot of different, and that's in most cases that's more about, oops, I made a mistake, let me recover something. Whereas this is more like, let me see what it's going to look like really on the real site. Like, it's kind of like next level preview and scheduling. Um, are there other CMSs that do a similar thing that we're kind of looking to for inspiration?
Yeah. So one point of clarification, I have not written one line of code for the Workspaces module. So I am a super user of it. So that's how I know
Okay.
how it works and what it does. So I don't have insight into some of the background questions that
Okay.
you're asking about. Um, I think there are CMSs that do uh, content staging in like a separate environment that you can then ship to a production environment. Adobe Experience Manager, I think, does that. I'm not sure of any open source CMSs that follow that paradigm.
Okay.
It would be interesting to see how other CMSs handle this sort of situation and see how and if workspaces should adapt to account for some maybe some broader use cases.
I have seen or heard of, I haven't seen, but I've heard of I want to say it was Optimizely, but I could be wrong. That has kind of like the idea of like a folder structure almost. So this is like if you kind of think of workspaces, this is kind of the same thing where you have like the parent live site folder, and then you can create additional versions of the site underneath it in different folders and kind of work in those folders. So this kind of feels like that, only without the kind of antiquated folder structure, idea behind it. But
Mhm.
again, I'm not 100% sure that was actually Optimizely. So
And
don't quote me on that.
yeah, and John, when you mentioned that, Crown Peak came to mind. I feel like I've seen something with folders and staging content in Crown Peak.
Hmm.
So to answer your question, Nick, yes, some other CMSs are doing something similar.
I have a question about like what is the best practice for developing the product when you're using workspaces. So, your developers usually have a local development environment. They're pushing it up to an integration environment from, feature branches. Then maybe you have that stage environment for QA, and then you push it to production. Like that's the environments. How do you recommend setting up the workspaces, and what would the typical developer workflow be when you're using workspaces on a site?
For a developer, I don't know that there's a lot of interaction with workspaces. It's really more of a content management function.
So the
Um,
developer is basically staying in the live workspace in their local dev,
yeah, they'd be
something like
staying in their
that.
live workspace in their local dev, making the config changes, site building, that sort of thing. They do their config export and go. Workspaces are um, the I want to say config entity. That's probably not the right entity, but the workspaces are fieldable. They're a fieldable entity. So if you needed to add fields to a workspace, kind of that container, you can do that. And
Oh,
that is config exportable. So if you wanted like a review slash status
yeah.
field that is updated based when people do a review, kind of hacking, a workflow into it a little bit. You could add a taxonomy vocab or just a text field to a workspace. So when someone's editing a workspace, the entity itself, they could update that and press save. And then that would be visible to everyone who's
That's
looked at
interesting.
it. Yeah.
Wait,
Awesome.
can a workspace, because if it's an entity, oh, that kind of hurts my head a little bit, but could it do
Ask it. I
revision?
see where you're going. Ask
Could
the
it do
question.
revision?
Like,
uh,
that's going to get real meta real fast, but
oh,
you
yeah.
probably could. I don't know if you'd want to.
Please don't.
That's gonna be the solution to having content edited more than once. You're gonna add your workspace to another workspace. uh,
Related to that, the whole revisions thing, I was kind of wondering if the solution for figuring out all that merging might be something like the conflict module. I don't know if you've used that before, but it will actually auto merge certain changes if they're compatible with each other. So, like if you changed this field and this field in two different revisions, it'll just merge them both together. But it will throw
Interesting.
an error if you do like two body field
Yeah.
edits. It's going to say, "Hey, I can't merge those. You got to do that manually." But it'll merge everything else.
Interesting. So a few minutes ago, Scott, you mentioned that you're kind of a super user of Workspaces, which is why you're here. Can you tell us a little bit about, we've already talked about kind of the promotion use case.
Mhm.
What other kind of interesting ways have you seen people using Workspaces or talk about using Workspaces?
Yeah, I think the biggest one is just the generic, we want to make edits to content, but we want them to be published, we wanna see what it looks like when it goes live, before it goes live. Um, and, with just kind of out of the box tools there, it's a little wonky when you're trying to, like, view something unpublished. By default, it wants to turn everything pink, and, that could throw off a visual display, and if you have a marketer looking at it or someone else looking at it, they may not be able to get past the visual of what it looks like before it goes live. So this is really gives you a nice holistic view of what that content will look like once it is published. So I think that's the biggest use case. Some other things in there that I have seen leveraged are, hey, we've got this body of content that needs to go live on such and such date, and they're waiting for approval for the until the last minute for it all to go live, and then it gets shut down, and they say, nope, we're not doing this thing, we're not publishing this right now, we're gonna have to wait till next quarter, next year, whatever. um, you can just hold those, if you don't need to edit those pieces of content otherwise, they can just kind of hang out there until you are ready and you want to
Yep.
revisit it.
Mm.
I think that would be good. Um, the the other pieces of workspaces that I think help out are, like I mentioned before, the group review. So if you have a lot of people that need to review it, if you have like, um, example would be potentially like uh, you're building a partner page for a client on your website and you want them to view this piece of content before it goes live, like a case
Okay.
study or use case, something like that, like a insight or case study story. You can give that to the client to review before it goes live. You can give them that preview link. That solves some problems with, temporarily granting someone the ability to view unpublished content. I know there's modules that allow for that, but this would give them the ability to view multiple pages of content very easily, um,
And edit them.
and potentially edit them. Yeah, given the right permissions. Yeah.
I think the interesting one of the interesting things that you kind of touched on there, but touched on earlier as well, is the ability to see things like kind of as they will be, right? Because some people can't kind of wrap their head around like, oh, it'll look like this.
Mhm.
And I know specifically when you're doing, kind of medical legal review of some sort, you may need in a very exact version, right? And the fact that I think Workspaces Extras kind of works with menu items and allows you to kind of like stage menu items and stuff like that. I think is super helpful so that you can get that very finite, like, hey, this is exactly what it's going to look like view. So
Mhm.
I definitely think that's an interesting point there.
Yeah.
um
I I imagine that there's views integration with this, but is there a way to access workspace content in Twig? Not that I think it's a good idea, but I imagine at some point somebody's going to want to do this. If you're, or is there a gotcha there? Like if you're accessing, normally when you're in a node template or something, you're using content dot whatever to grab a particular field, but sometimes you have to use the actual, I don't know the term, but like node dot field dot whatever. Is there a gotcha there if you're doing that? Are you gonna leak workspace information unintentionally, or um, is it kind of really just transparent and
Nick, is the question assuming that the workspace content hasn't been themed yet?
no?
Oh, okay.
Mm, I'm just curious if you can interact with them on the twig level, I guess is my question.
Yeah, I think it goes back to um, the particular viewer that is, looking at that piece of content. If you are within a workspace, the Twig template should all receive, content that is the edited version of that content. So it should be pretty
Yeah.
standardized. Keep things separate.
Well, I guess the reason why I was asking, like, the only use case I can think of for this that, I mean, I'm sure there's others, but the one that came to mind is if you wanted to have a side by side comparison of the actual data
Mhm.
that was entered, rather like, so I met you can visit the workspace if you want to see the fully themed full page, but if you wanted to just see side by side, these are the before, this is the after, not a diff, but like a theme thing. Like, is there a way to like print field one in this column and field one workspace one in this column?
Mhm.
Um,
I mean, so it's just a revision. So, right, you just go to do it the way you would show a revision.
can you grab it just by grabbing the particular revision? Because it's a workspace ID on the field, right? Or is it?
Yeah. Well, there's also the revision ID in the database as well, so
Ah,
you should be able to. What we've done is recommend people, as simple as it is, you're
side by
logged
side.
in. Yep, you're logged in one browser window, and you're not logged in another, and you can view that content side by side there. Not the it works, but it's not the most elegant to like see almost like a non-diff of what's changing.
Yeah, makes sense.
So I remember working with Workspaces early on and looking at some of the visuals when it got in, included into core, and seems like it has a lot of visual representation in the toolbar module. Um, Knowing that Drupal is moving away potentially from the toolbar module to the navigation module or implementation, kind of that side rail versus the horizontal. I'm wondering, will Workspaces have some sort of integration into navigation to be show that data in that kind of navigation scheme?
Yeah, I would hope that once the new navigation moves out of experimental, that Workspaces does have some kind of at least visual indicator to show that you're in a workspace. Today it doesn't, um, but hopefully it will be there.
Yeah, so it looks like there is an issue on Drupal.org for that. So if you want to apply a patch and test it out, you can do that. So it looks like I guess it's in the works, and I've kind of adopted navigation myself. Like I like it better than the toolbar. So I'll be interested to see like how that presents itself within that navigation.
So with workspaces, when you're looking at it in the menu structure, it's under admin config workflows. And then of course we have workflows as well. Have you seen examples where workspaces and workflows are combined? And what is that what would that look like?
Yeah. So the analogy I use is workspaces and workflows can coexist, but it's like trying to drive two trains down the same track at the same time.
Mm.
It is a mind melter sometimes when you're trying to figure out how this all works together. So let's say you have a node type that is under a workflow, just a simple content, edit, review, approve, publish workflow. So you've got that. And let's say you want to put that within a workspace. So you make your updates to a piece of content, kick off that workflow. And so it handles all the workflow steps as you need. Um, but in order for that workspace to be published, which means all of those changes go live, every piece of content within that workflow has to be at the last step of that workflow before the workspaces will publish it. This is a perfect case of where that Workspaces extras module where you can move a piece of content from one workspace to another would be great, particularly if like everything's ready to go except for that one node that needs to get through a final compliance review or whatever that is. You can move that to a different workspace, then publish everything else, and then that lingering piece of content can get published at a later time. It is a little mind melty sometimes to like you have in the workflow section in config of the admin UI, you've got workspaces and workflows. Yeah, it can get confusing. for folks.
Can you restrict content types to be, because obviously with workflows, you can say this content type is under a workflow, this one isn't. It's just going to be published or unpublished. Can you do the same thing with workspaces where you say this content type is in workspaces, but this other one is not, and I want a workflow on it?
Not that I'm aware of. I think that would be an interesting maybe extras module.
Yeah.
To
I can see it like landing pages are in workspaces, and then like your specialized content type for events or whatnot, because that's all structured content. It's in workflows, something like that.
Yeah.
So
That'd be cool if we could do it.
Mm-hmm.
So like pretty straightforward or more straightforward question answer. Would you recommend workspaces and workflows together on the same project? Or would you say, hey, like settle for one and go down that road?
Yeah, I would recommend settling for one. Maybe workspaces comes in if there is that large body of content that needs to be edited or released all at once.
Yeah.
I think that would be a good use case of using workspaces and workflows together. But just for day-to-day content edits, I think it adds friction that doesn't necessarily need to be there. So that'd be my recommendation.
We've talked about a lot of the cool features of workspaces, a couple of the limitations. Are there other limitations or gotchas? Like it seems like aliases and redirects are probably tied to just the live workspace. Is that are there any other things that people should just be aware of if they're starting to evaluate it for themselves or for their client?
Yeah, in my testing, and I haven't tested the most recent version that has come out just in the last few days or last week. Permissions feel wonky right now. It comes with, the core module ships with can edit workspaces they own, can edit workspaces owned by anyone, can create workspaces, can view content within their own workspace or any workspace. I haven't really been successful getting that to all work out cleanly. So typically what I've been doing is if you have the ability to edit content and you want to be able to do workspaces, you have access to creating workspaces, editing any content in any workspace. So I think either, maybe there's some documentation that could help there, or maybe there are bugs or limitations with permissions. So there's that. One question I get asked a lot is about moving that content from one workspace to another, but there's a module for that. The workflows, and then the other thing would be that the patch that you would need to clear up the cruft out of the database when merging a sub workspace into a parent workspace. Those feel to be the biggest drawbacks right now.
We've talked a lot about workspaces. We've talked a lot about what it does, how it works. I'm wondering, like, in your expert opinion, if somebody wanted to get started with workspaces, what's the best way to do that? Is it to like develop a plan? Is it to just install the module and like kick the tires on it? Like, what have you found works best?
I think anyone who's done Drupal for a while, but they haven't yet used workspaces, definitely kick the tires. A lot of learning happens just by experimenting with, what happens if I'm in this workspace and I edit content and then I go to live and I try to edit that same content. That's where a lot of that discovery happens. A plan that you can articulate to your, to I'll say your customer, your client, to the content managers of this is why we've added workspaces. This is how we intend for you to leverage it for your benefit. I think being able to articulate that is probably the most solid plan. And a lot of it's just going to be experimentation against what your requirements are to see if it fits, to see if workflow may be a better fit, or workspaces, or both, or neither. I think that's kind of the best approach at this time.
Awesome. Well, Scott, thank you for joining us. It's been a pleasure chatting about workspaces today. There are some limitations, but I feel like the limitations are reasonable, and it still solves like a lot of things in core, it solves such a painful problem to solve yourself.
Mhm.
I have seen a lot of follow-up issues, and the people made that kinda got it in seem to be responding pretty quickly to them, so there's still a lot of energy behind it, which is good to see, but I'm excited. Thank you for chatting with us.
Yeah, yeah, happy to be here. Yeah, I'll just say Workspaces is still, I feel, early on in its maturity. So in future versions, I think we're going to have a lot more identified use cases and a lot more problems to solve with fewer limitations. Yeah.
Do you have questions or feedback? Reach out to Talking Drupal on Twitter with the handle Talking Drupal or by email with show@talkingdrupal.com. You can connect with our hosts and other listeners on Drupal Slack in the Talking Drupal channel.
And you can promote your Drupal community event on Talking Drupal. You can learn more at talkingdrupal.com/tdpromo.
Get the Talking Drupal newsletter to learn more about our guest hosts, show news, upcoming shows, and much more. Sign up for the newsletter at talkingdrupal.com/newsletter.
And thank you, patrons, for supporting Talking Drupal. Your support is greatly appreciated. You can learn more about becoming a patron at talkingdrupal.com and choosing become a patron. All right, Scott, if our listeners want to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
You can reach out to me on Twitter. I am at Node Loophole. That'll probably be the best, or find me on Drupal Slack, Scott Weston.
Great. And Josh, how about you?
Yeah, I'm Joshua Wami on Drupal.org and on Drupal Slack.
John, how about you?
You can find me on all the major social networks and Drupal.org at John Picozzi. And you can find out more about EPAM at epam.com.
And you can find me pretty much everywhere at Nixvan, NICXVAN.
And if you've enjoyed listening, we've enjoyed talking. Have a good one, everyone.
See you guys next week.